Hi everyone. I am here today with Rebekah, and I am so excited because we're going to talk about inclusive education. So, if you're curious maybe about inclusion or what that can look like, we're going to chat more about that, but you're going to definitely want to stay to the end because I know there's going to be lots of really great nuggets in here. So, before we get started, I'm going to have Rebekah go ahead and introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her experience in special education and what she's doing now. So, go ahead. Hi, Rebekah.
Hi, thank you for having me on here. I always love chatting with you. I feel like I learn as much from you as I'm like giving knowledge on the podcast. So I'm excited to
Likewise.
be here. So, a little bit about me. I was a teacher in the classroom for 12 years. I've taught every grade except fifth grade, and I have taught every type of classroom imaginable. I've taught, early elementary resource all the way up through the 18 to 21-year-old transition multidisability classes. So I've seen it all and done it all, and I'm not easily surprised by anything at this point.
Yep.
I did leave the classroom in the fall of 22. I had an amazing principal who really encouraged me to step into this path that I'm on now, which is speaking to teachers and doing conferences, professional developments with districts, and I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah, I've seen such a spark in you as you've kind of made that transition, and I feel like you've really found your stride of where you want to be right now, and I
Oh,
think
thank
it's just
you.
so amazing. So can you explain a little bit about what inclusive education is, and how that kind of relates to the school settings and what that might look like?
Yeah, so I think it might be easier to start with what inclusive education is not.
Yeah.
So, an inclusion classroom, we hear that term all the time. Inclusion is not a setting.
Hmm.
And I know there's schools that I've been at, there's schools that my friends teach at where they're like, oh, this is the inclusion classroom. Well,
Hmm.
if you're having to label it the inclusion classroom, it's probably not as inclusive as you'd like it to be.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
So it's not just having the students be physically present in a classroom with their non-disabled peers, it's having them be engaged participants and valued members of that classroom, not just there for the lesson, but learning alongside and with their typical peers and having those typical peers learn with and alongside the students with IEPs.
Yeah, I'm sure some of us have heard the special education is a service, not a place.
Yes.
And I feel like that's the same thing for inclusion. If you've been hearing inclusive education or inclusion in your school, like it is a service. It is a tiered service that is provided versus a self-contained or a resource or inclusion, if you've heard it. So it's a different type of tiered support that is embedded in our education system at this time. Yeah. So what does an inclusion teacher do? Maybe we have some people who are looking for an interview or applying for jobs that says inclusion teacher. What does that typically entail?
So my role as an inclusion teacher was I was in the general education classroom with the general education subject matter teacher. So I co-taught English and math. Sixth grade was
Okay.
where I did that type of teaching. Loved it. Was not cut out for middle school. Props to all my middle school teachers. My husband is a middle school teacher, and I much preferred the younger ones or the older
Mhm.
ones. But I would go in with the gen ed teachers. We would lesson plan together. We would come up with accommodations for our students with IEPs. And please notice that I said our students with
Hmm.
IEPs. They were not my students. They were not, the kids without IEPs weren't her students. They were ours.
Yeah.
And we taught together. We covered material together. We provided accommodations together. And we made sure that all of our students, regardless of ability or disability, were able to learn to the best of their ability in the
Hmm.
classroom.
Yeah, it sounds like you really had a nice experience being a co-teacher in an inclusion setting. Did you
I
guys
did.
share the teaching experience as well? So like was there days that you had taught or parts of the lesson that you would teach and then that you'd kind of like switch roles or
Yeah, so I was actually very lucky. I had amazing co-teachers. Like they were really on board with it. They wanted me to be seen just as much as being a classroom teacher as they were, even though it was
Mhm.
their name that was on the schedule.
Yeah.
Um, they really took that ball and ran with it. And I know that's not the experience for everybody. So I know that I was very, very lucky to have that. But yeah, there were some days where I led the lesson. There were other days where the gen ed teacher led the lesson, especially if I had to do observations or if I was
Mm-hmm.
collecting progress monitoring data. It was nice to be able to have the other person step up and step in to cover all of the material so that I could do my side of the job as well.
Yeah, because there's some of that extra like paperworky stuff that we do
Mm-hmm.
need to make sure that we keep up on too.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key components that you feel like an inclusive classroom should have?
So when you are trying to really plan out how to make it inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
there are a few like kind of key strategies to look at. You want your environment to be inclusive, you want your materials to be inclusive, and you want the supports that are offered in your classroom to be inclusive. Speaking from personal experience, I had a student again in that sixth grade setting, and he used a wheelchair for mobility.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very difficult trying to locate a desk that worked with his wheelchair because it
Mm-hmm.
was not a typical sized
Yeah.
chair. So we really struggled with that. And we should have had materials in place, but we had a couple of desks that would fit that were somewhere in the county. We had to get in touch with the
Mm-hmm.
board and they had to get in touch with specialists and the OTs and like, who has the desk? Where's the desk? So
Mm-hmm.
that was not a proud moment in my teaching career because that was not inclusive of him. He did
Mm-hmm.
not feel included in that environment because he would have to sit at a small group table until we were able to get that desk.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with the classroom materials. We want to make it so that it's accessible to all of our students. We want it to represent all of our students. So not everything needs to be, you know, looking one specific way. It needs to showcase everyone who's going to be in that classroom. And
Mm-hmm.
then with the supports as well, you know, sometimes the supports that we have for our students with IEPs, really all of the students could benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing research right now for my book that's coming out at the end of this summer. And we were talking about one of the articles I was reading was talking about the curb cut.
Mm-hmm.
So a curb cut, like when you're going for a crosswalk, like from a sidewalk to a crosswalk, it's that little divot that's
Yep.
cut out. Yep. And that was originally made for people who use wheelchairs for mobility, but also it benefits people who are pushing strollers or
Mm-hmm.
who have a difficult time stepping up or stepping down. So really something that's designed for accessibility for one group of people really makes it easier for everyone to access as well.
Yeah, I was trying to just think. I know I've seen things like a word bank. Like, yes, that
Mm-hmm.
might be a accommodation a student has on an IEP, but like a word bank might be really helpful for every student in that classroom. As you're thinking about like the materials and supports that you put in place for an inclusive classroom. Like, so there might be moments that you do have a word bank that is provided and that everybody can have access to, not just a small group of students that you might be targeting. Uh,
Exactly. Another example would be like manipulatives for math. That's an accommodation that I've seen in many, many IEPs,
mhm.
but also the science shows that multisensory instruction makes learning occur faster and the information is retained longer when they are able to get their hands on it. And that's true for every student.
Yeah, I agree. And I know we've talked about multisensory supports as well. So make
Mhm.
sure to check out that. I know this is already another YouTube video. So I will make sure to link that below so that you have access to that if you want to learn more about multisensory learning. So maybe teachers are just starting out trying to explore this inclusive learning environment. Where can teachers learn more about this, or how do you feel like you kind of got into this about being more inclusive of your classrooms?
So unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of material that I was able to find when I was, in the special education classroom trying to learn more about inclusion because a lot of the materials that is geared towards special education is
Mhm.
more for those self-contained classes.
Yes.
So I just kind of decided to put it out there myself. So I'm not saying that I am the authority on that, but I have found materials that helped me that I have then turned around and shared on my social media.
Mm-hmm.
I've got my book coming out at the end of the summer. It's called Blueprint for Inclusion, and it
Awesome.
goes over a lot of tips and tricks and strategies to make your classrooms more inclusive. Another great website for inclusion is understood.org.
Mm-hmm.
I love that website. It's so easy to understand. You can, you go to it, you access it, and it's like, are you a parent, a caregiver, a teacher? Are you looking at this for yourself? And it goes through so many different categories, and inclusion is a big part of that. Inclusion and co-teaching are very well covered on that website as well.
Yeah, for sure. I'll make sure to link those below and your website as well. And when your book comes out, I'll make sure that's there too, so that we can learn about being more inclusive, because I think this is definitely a trend that we are moving towards, and just supporting everybody in our environments, whether it's a school environment or just community in general. We do need to be more mindful of what we are putting out there and how we are supporting just people in general. So, any
Absolutely.
other tips and tricks that you have for inclusive education that we didn't talk about?
My biggest tip is to make sure that you are in communication and collaborate with those general education teachers, because they are going to be your go-to person. I was not a sixth grade math teacher, but I had an awesome co-teacher who did
Mhm.
know all of that, the math side of things. I had to
Yeah.
relearn, like, how do you factor? How do you find the greatest common factor of two numbers?
Yes.
But working with her, I was able to take my knowledge of accommodations and special education and her core content knowledge, and we were able to work together to come up with lesson plans that really met all of the needs of the students, that
Hmm.
still met all of the grade level standards that they're supposed to learn as well. So
Yeah,
collaboration and communication are big ticket items.
for sure. And I'm sure there was great strategies that you brought in about multisensory learning,
Mhm.
or providing trainings or support about accommodations.
Mhm.
So I feel like it is a two-way street of learning and collaborating with each other
Absolutely.
as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. And any other resources or websites that you have that you could share with us beyond your website and understood.com?
Um, I'm not 100% sure. I'm sorry. Maybe we just like leave that
That's
question.
fine. That's fine.
Okay,
Great.
sorry.
Great. We'll just do a little pause here. Great. Thanks, Rebekah, for being here. We really do appreciate it. I feel like we've learned so much about inclusive education. If you have any questions that we may not have answered, you are welcome to comment below. If I don't have the answer, I will make sure Rebekah can get an answer for you. But thank you so much for being here. I feel like I've learned so much more about inclusive education.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is definitely something I'm very passionate about, so I'm thrilled to be able to speak on it.